My name is Nat, everyone, and welcome to Exceptional Individuals webinar. See what I did there? Webinar, Nat. We're working on it. And today we are going to be looking at cognitive and executive functions of ASD, Autism Spectrum Disorder. So a bit about myself. I am neurodivergent. I was diagnosed with ASD. So as an organization, we typically talk about dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD. Today, we're mainly focusing on autism, but honestly, this applies to all sorts of executive and cognitive functions. Now, here's our lovely team. We're mostly neurodivergent, so we're a lovely team of experts via experience, which puts us in a unique position in the market. We try and help organizations become more inclusive and diverse through workshop and trainings. And with the revenue, we're able to put it back in the community and support people for free. Hence why these sessions are now completely free, hopefully for always. That's the goal anyway. Now, as I did mention, every week we record different webinars or webinars, and the last one we did was forming memories. And this was looking about how the brain creates memories. And this is particularly interesting from a neurodivergent perspective, because some of us are not so good at remembering things. So understanding why the brain might find things difficult to remember things can normally help you find little strategies to work. We've been doing a bit of a deep dive lately into neuroscience, but do not worry if you're brand new to the subject. We try to make it as accessible and easily digestible as we possibly can. So cognitive functions in autism spectrum disorder. I mean, first of all, what even is cognitive functions? Truthfully, when people talk about cognitive functions, executive functions, I was getting completely confused. Are they synonymous? Is that really a word? Are they interchangeable? Are they one and the same? So I wanted to start off with a quick definition just to kind of set the tone, because I do use them interchangeably, but there is a difference. So for cognitive functions, they are basic mental skills which we use every day. So these are like the bare necessities. These are everything: your memory, your attention, your language, your perception. But yet executive functions help us manage and control how we use these skills to achieve the goals. So think one is like the toolkit and the other one is the person using the tools. So in order to have executive functions such as planning and organizing, we need cognitive functions. So cognitive functions is the umbrella, executive functions is underneath it. But again, they're often used interchangeably, but it's good so we have like a basic foundation. Now, what we're actually looking at today, just so we're all on the same page, is we're going to be looking at association cortex and frontal lobe. I know, a bit scary if you're not used to all the terminology, but honestly, do not worry. We'll break it down, and it is important. In order to understand autism, we need to understand a little bit about the brain. We're going to be looking at higher order control functions. So essentially, how are we able to do things like talk and listen and concentrate and plan? And in terms of for people who are neurodivergent or have developmental disorders or have autism, what is actually going on in this frontal lobe of ours? Because there are differences, and this is an emerging field, so research still needs to be done, but some really interesting things that we already know about. So first question to put all of you, and put a little pin where the association cortex is. And fingers crossed you remembered. Don't worry if you get it wrong. So all you need to do if you're able to join is on your phone, you just put a little dot and it will show you. Okay. Oh, we got two different ends of the spectrum here. So let's see. Okay, nice and mounting up. And with always things, I'm not expecting any of you to know this stuff, but we will, if you do know, it is useful. Okay, nice, they're coming in. Okay, let's see how we're doing here. I think, oh, up there apparently. Is it though? Okay, we will come back to that. Oh, what's a quick question here? We have learned that my spouse is autistic. It has explained a lot, and I think having a label is very helpful. My spouse is struggling and feels upset and worries and keep apologizing. How can I help? Well, that's a good question. I'll come back to that one if that's okay. Just kind of keep with the flow of things, but thanks for asking. Now, my question on this one is, how does information flow in our brains? This is an interesting one. You may have never even thought of this before, but essentially when our brain is thinking, it either starts from top to bottom or top bottom to top. Which one do you think it is? Now, typically, when we think of information, we normally have a particular view, like from one end to the other. But information flows from lower to higher brain areas, like the primary visual cortex to object recognition regions. But importantly, it can also flow top down. I would say these arrows are back to front, wouldn't you? Yeah. Did I mention I'm dyslexic? I don't know if I can use that D card right now, but if so, I'd like to cash it in. But yeah. So information in our brain can flow in both directions. Now, we normally talk about bottom up, but with autism, maybe we should be looking a little bit more at top down. And hopefully this will make a bit more sense in a moment. And yes, Anna, you are correct. It is both. And that is an important thing to remember, because depending how our brain is flowing that information for our brain will depict the type of answers that we're likely to get. So on here, I want you to select which one you think is top-down processing. Have a guess. So is it processing sensory information and then integrating it into our brain? Or is it using models and expectations to interpret sensory information? If that still sounds a bit confusing, we can break it down a bit more. So the first one is top-down processing when you look at things and then you figure it out, or is top-down processing when you look at something and you think, have I seen this before? Can I make an educated guesstimate? So in autism, composed top-down processing impacts interpreting ambiguous stimuli and contextual use, leading to odd perceptions. So it is, in fact, the second one. Now, this is, again, if you see an orange, I know it's an orange. But if you see this kind of ball shape and you're not really certain what it is, your brain will often use all the previous information it has collected over the years and use that to make an informed decision. Because often we do not know what we're looking at, and we use previous kind of stored models or data or information in order to make that guess. Now, to show a bit more information, what is top-down processing? Simply put, it's when your brain fills in the blank and predicts what's next. Kind of like mind reading. So people say, what am I, a mind reader? Well, you kind of are in some ways. A good example is this word here. In the chat, I want you to tell me what it says. Just write out what you see, and it will give you a good idea on what we mean by top-down processing. So I'm not going to spoil it. I just need one person to hopefully answer, and we'll see what we got. Oh, April says the CHT. Any other takers on what it says? Oh, we got the chat. Oh, the cat. Oh, yeah, we could do one on dyspraxia. The cat. Now, interestingly, a lot of you said the cat. It doesn't say the cat. If you look, that's a T. That is a H, even though that's an E, that's a C. Oh, that's a H. Now, see here, we thought that was a A. Why did we think that was it? Well, because we've already got a H here, and that H is kind of angled, right? Now, normally, no issue here. That's clearly the THE. Now, with cat, we've seen that word before. We know what a cat is. We've read it many, many times. So the obvious thing that our brain jumps to is going to be an A, but in fact, it is also a H. So even though those letters are exactly the same, our brain has automatically done some conversion, because that is what we mean by top-down processing. So yeah, makes sense, right? Even though we may not always have all the information, our brains are very good at figuring it out. And if you ever think handwriting is the exact same, have you ever wondered how every single person's handwriting is different? And yet, unless you're a doctor, we can read it, which is pretty impressive. And that is how our brain does information. But those with autism, they might struggle a bit more with that. It might not come as second nature. Now, here is another image and a good example. So what is it an image of? Let me know. Like, any ideas what this is an image of? What are you seeing first of all? What comes secondary? Okay, Caitlin says a mouse. Any other takers? Okay, a mouse at first, then you see an old man's face. Thanks, Graham. An old chap with glasses, a man sleeping, a man's face. And this is where we get to the idea on that, when people say those with autism see differently or process information differently, what does that even mean? Is that just a nice way of saying they're a bit different? No, it's true. We really do see things different. So where some people will see a mouse, you see an ears there, the kind of nose, the eye. Other people will see an old man with glasses straight away. So there's the eyes, there's the nose, that looks like a big smile. And it's really interesting, depending on how your brain puts information together, some people will see some things first, others will see others. And it can relate to many things. Your culture can depict what you see first, your kind of way your brain is wired, how you're feeling in a day. So we don't always see the same things. Our brain is taking an educated guess. And when we're looking at drawings or cartoons, that's all it is. Our brain is saying, oh, that looks like a human being. And then you believe it is. However, they don't exist in real life. It's ambiguous figures. It depends how much I focus. Now, interestingly, how good were you all at switching back between mouse, old man, mouse, old man? Now, if you struggle with that kind of swap, that again is a very strong characteristic of those with ASD. If you find switching back no trouble, then that's not. Now, obviously, if you find it difficult to switch, it doesn't mean you have ASD. It's just one characteristic that people might look at when they're doing assessments. Oh, Anna says, I usually see both. They're just struggling to choose the right one, depending what might be expected of me. Yeah, I know for me, once I've seen one, I've struggled to find the other one again, even if I've already found it. So quick one to all of you. What did you find first? Did you find, well, here it says it's a rat, mice, who knows, or a man wearing glasses? For me personally, I saw a mouse first. As for the man wearing glasses, I can't see the glasses. Can any of you help me? Like, I see there's the eyes right, but I don't see the glasses. But maybe that's just me.
The eyes, the biggest circle is the eyeball, and the smaller circle is like the eye in the is the glasses, and then the smaller marking is the eye.
I see.
Can you see it?
Yes, yeah, I see it. Yeah, I thought that was a pupil, but yeah, no, that makes sense.
That's like the eye, yeah, in the glasses. Does that make sense?
Yeah, got it. Oh, thanks, Emma. Appreciate that. Oh, and Natalie now sees a mouse as well. It's interesting, isn't it? Fun little games. All right, one more of these, just so we kind of really get the hang of it. What do you see? Look at this image and write down, what do you see first? Okay, we've got like Isabel says a man, April says a woman, a picture of an old woman and a young lady, a lady's face. Oh, we're listening, a man playing a musical instrument. We've got a saxophone. So have you noticed that different, depending on who you are, you will come up with a different answer. Some people will see the man, a very cartoon one. You see, I think, quite a big nose there, holding a saxophone, playing a tune. Other people will see a lady with kind of long hair and the eyes and the lips. And it depends on your prior experiences. For instance, if any of you love playing music or listening to music or sax, then maybe you're more inclined to see the man. Now, if any of you just are used to seeing women's faces, maybe on Instagram or who knows what, maybe you're more likely to see the woman. So you can see how this isn't just unique to those with autism. Essentially, everyone has unique individual neurology, and that will depict how your brain puts information together. I'm sure you've seen a thing where you see like, oh, is it a frog or is it a rabbit? There's loads of these, but they're kind of a fun way of going about it. Oh, Anna says a shadowy lady, nice. Now, one more is the idea of seeing the wood for the trees. It's a common English expression, but what does it actually mean? So it's seeing, like, if you're in a forest, are you looking at the trees behind, or are you looking at the trees in front? The foreground or top ground or background? Now, one of these is top-down processing. The other is bottom-up processing. So top-down is the visionary or the person who sees the big picture. Does that sound like you? Or you are more bottom-up? Are you more focused on the details rather than the landscape? And again, depends who you are. Each people are different. I would probably say I'm top-down. I see big pictures more, where a lot of other neurodiverse people tend to be really detailed-orientated. And this is another really interesting thing. When people say neurodiverse people or autistic people are detailed orientated, is that just a buzzword, or does it actually mean something? Well, when we're looking at whether you're top or bottom processing, it does mean something, because some of us are genuinely programmed more likely to be detailed orientated. So you can see all these kind of little kind of words or buzzers, words that we use to describe things like autism, do have a scientific background. Now, if we kind of get a bit more sciencey, when we're talking about how our brains recognizes these images, we're essentially talking about the associated cortex, a nice meaty bit of the brain. And we can divide this into 3 bits. We've got the frontal association, the temporal association, and the parental association. And the one we're going to be looking at mostly today, because that's the one that directly relates to autism, or at least it looks that way, and we'll talk about how we know this stuff soon in a moment, is decision-making and working memory. So this, if you think decision-making, how can we make a decision on the spot? Are we able to quickly determine what something is? And are we able to remember it? Are we able to pull back into our memory banks and say, you know what? I've seen that image before. I know what it is. My way of always remembering this, did any of you used to watch Pokemon and you get like, who's that Pokemon? And they'd be like in black and white, and you kind of got to guess what it is. That is a really great example of like kind of knowing what something cat is without even seeing it. Your mind is filling in the blanks. All right, just me, I guess. All right. So let's move on. Yes, April remembers. So now moving on a bit more to executive functions. And remember, executive functions is like the one under like your cognitive functions. This is actually using how our brain sorts information out into real world activities like planning, organizing, time management. Okay, nice. A few of you got that. So to start off with, can some of you name some examples of cognitive functions? So any kind of thing that you would consider to be a cognitive function. Now, I've got some examples hidden around somewhere, but let's see what any of you can come up with. All right, we've got thinking. Yep, absolutely. Studying, evaluating. Come on, guys, there's got to be a few other cognitive functions around the place. Ability to follow directions. Yep, absolutely. Actioning things, speech. So essentially, all the skills you kind of need to be a great employee. And it's not that people who struggle with these areas aren't able to be a great employee, but these are things that are going to be more challenging. And these are typically the things which are stopping us from being our best selves. So as I always say, things like autism aren't the disability. It's the kind of effects on how it works within day-to-day life. A lot of life requires us to have good memory, good reading abilities, making decisions, talking. And if you're not able to do it in the way that is expected, that's typically where the difficulties originate from, not the autism in itself. Okay, we've got critical thinking, organizing, answering Menti questions. Absolutely. A lot of you are doing some great cognitive functions today. Paying attention. And I know one of you mentioned dyspraxia, I think, in the chat. It's another really thing where dyspraxia and cognitive functions are really strongly linked as well. So you can see how it doesn't matter what neurodevelopmental or learning condition you have, they are all kind of connected when it comes to how the brain processes cognitive and executive functions. So what executive function do you struggle with? So remember, this is kind of more tangible, like doing something with the tools you have. Do you find you struggle more with planning, self-control, time management, or organization? These are some of the ones that most people struggle with. And we'll be looking at why do we struggle with them? And why are people with autism more likely to struggle with them? Okay, most of you say you struggle with time management. Then we've got self-control. Oh, head-to-head. Then a bit of planning and then organization. I probably would do self-control. And an organization and planning. I'm all right with time management, actually. But it's interesting how we're all so different. And again, this is where the frontal cortex plays a really significant role. So the front part of our brain, we've really got to be keeping a close eye on. But how do we actually test if someone's executive functions are working A-OK? Because essentially, when we're looking at does someone have autism, we are going to be testing executive functions. Now, there are other areas that we need to look at, but this is a really key area. So in ASD, the frontal cortex impairments affect cognitive reasoning and adaptability. If your cognitive, if parts of your frontal cortex aren't working how one might expect, then you might find it difficult to do switching of tasks. You might find effective cognitive reasoning might be a bit more challenging. There's lots of other areas which have a knock-on effect. And as we know, as of today, we can't just go in a machine, go, okay, you've got autism. We're not there yet. So we have to do kind of different tests, evaluations, a bit more investigative than we would maybe ideally like. So one interesting example on how to test for cognitive functions is the Wisconsin card sorting test. And essentially, this is a little game which demonstrates how flexible you are and at responding to change. What it is that, let's say you have 2 green stars, and then you've got to think, okay, so the instructions are simple. You can put that green star on any other green image. All right, so on this video, easy, I put the green stars on the green triangle. And then on the next image, they might say, now you must only put it on a triangle rather than a star. So they'll change little bits, and it's all about how quick can your brain change instructions. If the rules of the game change, are you able to quickly make that rapid movement? And to be honest, this is a difficult task for anyone. And it's something you can try yourself. There's versions online, you can get little cards out. It's kind of a good memory activity, and it shows you how good are you at switching. This isn't something which is unique to ASD. Again, people with dyslexia, dyspraxia also can struggle with this as well. Another task which might be done is a Tower of Hanoi. And the idea is, have any of you done this game before? Or you might have done activity groups where you have like massive poles in the ground and you've got to move the tires. Essentially, you have all the tires in A and you've got to get all the tires over to Tower C, but they've got to go in order of biggest to smallest. And this requires you to do a lot of mental processing and a lot of like forward thinking in order to do it. So move all the discs to Tower 3 without placing larger discs on top of the small one. This is another interesting task. What are some more? Now, this one is a classic one. All I want you to do, and feel free to do this at home if you're able to, just shout out the colors of each square. Should be nice and simple, right? Blue, red, green, blue, red, yellow, green, yellow, red, blue, green, blue, red, yellow. All right, that wasn't too bad. That wasn't too bad. So yeah, thumbs up, was able to do that one nicely. But if we want to test it even a bit more further, things might just start to get a bit more difficult. So now, can you do the exact same thing? And again, thumbs up if once you've been able to do it. Oh God, I hate these ones. I really struggle. So we're saying the color, right? Blue, pink, green, red, black, blue, red, blue, yellow, black, pink, green, red, yellow, red, blue. So you see how I struggled with that? Like, I'm sure a lot of you did too. It should, I love brain training. It should be easy. Like, you know the colors. We just did it previously. Nice and simple. I know my colors. But here, the brain, you know how we're doing that's like top-down processing or bottom-up processing? It really depends how the brain works. Is it kind of looking at the color first, or is it looking at the writing first? And is it able to switch? Now, if you did the exact same challenge, but the other way around, just reading it, so red, blue, purple, yellow, black, green, purple, orange, red, green, black, blue, yellow, purple, purple, red. See, I found that one easier. Interesting, though. I think, again, depending on the type of thinker you are, how your brain works, you might find one easier than you might find the other one. Well, April just completed it. I'm curious to know which ones you all found easier. Do you find it easier to read it or to say the color? So these are all just classic tests that people might use in order to understand someone's cognitive and executive functioning. Okay, we've got reading, nice. I think most people are reading. Interesting, why? Now, another task, and this one is a lot more challenging, is called the end back task. And essentially, you click the little heart button, whenever you see a square location that is the same as it was 2 trials ago. So let's say, okay, the square's there. Okay, 1 go, 2 go. Okay, no, so that doesn't count. You've got to really keep tabs on all the squares and try to remember at least 2 goes in the past. Well, it also, this is for working memory. And this is also a really useful one, which is done for those who have autism sometimes. Now, honestly, it's really challenging. I struggle with this a lot. And you've got the NBAC 1, NBAC 2, NBAC 3. So for instance, you might start with only 1 difference, then 2 difference, then 3, then 4 and 5, and you'll go up until the point where you're no longer able to remember. So how long are you able to kind of keep that working memory in order before you're like, no, my brain just completely wipes? I kind of see it like RAM in a computer. And if I was a computer, I would be a really slow, like Windows 98. Oh, well. How do you do it? As in, what are you required to do? All right, thanks, Melissa. So essentially, you see a square and you've got to remember where that square is. And then after 2 more goes of the square popping up, if it goes in the exact same location, then you would do a little heart or a thumbs up, or you'd make a note. So it requires you to have an awareness of where every square is for multiple turns. So I've got to remember that square, got to remember that square, got to remember that square. Okay, and then you can see how it trips the brain up, because not every time it's going to repeat. Yeah, it's personally, this is one that throws me every time. Now, in terms of these tests, they are useful, but is there a way we're able to dig in a bit deeper? So what do you think is the best way in order to learn about the brain? Is it neuroimaging, when we put our brain in a big scanner and it has to look about where our brain is firing and where the action is? Or is it looking at studies of the brain, looking at previous reports, making notes, making observations? So interestingly, yet most of you have put just about studies of the brain. And honestly, at this moment in time, yes, studies of the brain are more useful at the moment. But I do think we're going to see this change, particularly with the use of AI and a mixture. But honestly, both are very useful tools, but both are very different. Now, we know that we do not know much about autism yet. So neuroimaging can only tell us part of the story. But maybe together, we're starting to get a better picture. What looks at the function of the brain? In terms of doing these brain scans, are we talking about MRI or fMRI? Now, a lot of time they think, oh, they sound awfully similar. Don't worry. Essentially, MRI stands for magnetic resonance imaging, or we've got functional magnetic resonance imaging. We're looking at fMR. Yeah, that's the one for the brain. The other one will do the rest of your body. This one does the brain. Makes an important little distinction. Now, there's an interesting quote from Mr. Hampshire, and I picked him because I'm from Hampshire and I like the surname. He says, the frontal regions, remember the front parts of the brain, seem to be important when learning new skills. Once a skill is established, there is less frontal involvement. And this is really interesting because let's say when you're a child and you're learning a new skill, you might do a scan of the brain and you'll see a lot of activity in a certain area. But when someone gets it, they understand it, there's less activity. So this shows us that maybe it's how the brain goes from short-term memory to long-term memory, or like it requires less energy. So as an adult, we can do things easier because they become second nature. They are like pre-installed. But for those who have certain neurodevelopmental conditions, these kind of like skill sets or activities which normally become cemented in our brain, they never kind of fully kind of settle. So it's why something can be very difficult to remember or to learn or to retain. So again, really interesting. And though none of this is definitive, you can start to see how it might link up to things like autism. Now, moving a bit on to the medical studies, have any of you heard of the curious tale of Phineas Gage? Yes or no? Okay, the first one is no, the second one is yes. And for those of you, this is a classic one. If any of you study this, you'll heard it a million times, but it's interesting nevertheless. Old Phineas was a lovely guy. He was working on the railroads all the long day. Next thing he knows, playing with a bit of dynamite, a massive rod goes right through his bloody eye and through his brain. That's not good. He's not having a good time. And you know what? They pull it out. He's fine. Somehow, Phineas lived. Everyone's happy. But even though he lived, he wasn't the same. His personality, he was mean, he was distant, he had terrible memory. And it found out that for him, but from this study, we realized that parts of the brain are directly connected to cognitive and executive functions. Even though he was fine because he lost a bit of the brain, he wasn't fine. So it's how we learn that certain areas have more of an impact than others. So interesting. Again, not related to autism, but does show us that parts of the brain are directly connected to things like executive functions, which we know people with autism do struggle with. Now, looking at these, in terms of areas that are linked to executive functions, it isn't just autism. We've got autism, bipolar, major depression, schizophrenia. There's multiple conditions. It isn't just autism, but obviously we're focusing on autism today. So a couple of true or false about autism, just to make sure we're on the same page. True or false? Do people with autism like changes? And before you say, nah, everyone's different, I know, but we have to obviously round it up at some point. So take it all with a pinch of salt, but on average, do people like autism like changes? Do they have a preference for repetition? Are there impairments in social development? And are they typically good at executive functioning tests? Quite a lot here. And you can see here's a good triad of impairments, like all the things that we need in order to have autism. You need some difficulties with social communication, a nice little bit of social interaction, awkwardness, and a bit of repetitive behavior, and you got some autism. I mean, some people would argue with that. Some people say there's other criterias, but that is one that people have been looking at a long time. Anyway, let's see how you're all doing. So we've got likes for change. Okay, I think that's poor English. My bad again. Yeah, no, people with autism typically don't like changes. Preference for repetition. Yep, so repeating things, having that kind of routine tends to be beneficial. Impairments in social development in terms of kind of integrating, talking with people, unfortunately so. And in terms of being good at executive function tasks, tend not to be. So with these things, these are typically what we use to see if someone has autism or not. Again, it's very different for everyone, but these are like the typical things that people would look out for. Now, another task, which if we're using just autism, is theory of mind. And theory of mind is really interesting. So I want you to all look at this little image here, and you see there's a dad on the phone, and he's all like, bring, bring. It says, hey, what are you up to, Denzel? And then Denzel's just like, yeah, hi, Dad, I'm just playing with this. Now, judging by that little interaction, does Dad know what Denzel is actually playing with? Yes or no? So even though they just had a phone call, is Dad in the loop? What is that kid playing with? Yes, April, we did this with a preview one. Oh, Melissa says no. We got a few people say yes. Most people say no. And it is, in fact, no. Because if you noticed, Denzel there, he doesn't say he's playing with a choo-choo train. He just says, yeah, I'm playing with this. And this shows you theory of mind. What is theory of mind? Basically, it's mind reading. Are you able to guess? Do you have that empathy? When we talk about people with autism not having empathy, I think we misunderstand what we're actually talking about. People with autism does have empathy, but they might struggle to put themselves in someone else's shoes in a conventional sense. The boy here, Denzel, he's not able to kind of realize that he's on the phone, so his dad is not able to see. He hasn't made that connection between being different because he normally sees his dad face to face, so he struggles to make that connection. There's also another classic task about a little girl putting a toy in a box and then she walks away and you ask, well, where's the toy? And, so it's really interesting as well. And this is something which those with autism really struggle at. And this is a test which is done time and time again. Yes, so Melissa's right. Just don't know how to understand other people's mental state. While we're very good at understanding our own brains to a certain extent, we might struggle to think what the other person is feeling or thinking. And if you expand this further into adult life, if someone is sad and you're not sure why, or you miss a joke, you can see how not understanding someone's other mental state could be a problem later down the line. For some of us, we get better at this. For for others of us, it remains a continuous issue about reading the nuances of day-to-day life. Yes, April said it right. It's like the Sally and Jill task, and that's exactly right. Another one, which is a really interesting study from this, is I want you to look at this little GIF, right? And I want you to write out in the description or chat what is actually going on. So let me know what is happening in this image. We've got a red triangle and a little black triangle. Oh, April says it looks like the big triangle is chasing the small one. Any other views or opinions on this? A parent and a child playing. Oh, thanks, BJ. Okay, interesting. Okay, we've got a red triangle is mum. Red triangle is mum. Red is blocking black. Now, this is a really interesting thing because I notice a lot of you are kind of putting human characteristics on these triangles. They're triangles. They're just moving around. And yet some of you are saying they're like animals and babies, like one is being maternal, they're being playful, they're moving around. None of this is true. These are all ideas that you have contributed towards these shapes. And remember when we did those activities at the beginning about, okay, what are you seeing? About, is the brain able to fill in the gaps? And that's exactly what it's doing. Even though these shapes are non-human, you're able to kind of fill in the gaps and put your own context to it. Where people with autism who have done this test often came out with just saying, oh yes, the shape is moving a right angle, is moving up, it's gone left, it's gone right. They were far more literal. So if you think about it, this is interesting. The autistic person was not wrong by their description of these shapes. They just described it in a different way. And this is so spot on. When we talk about autism, we shouldn't talk about deficits. We're just talking about a difference in terms of how the brain processes the information. So yeah, I see it as a very playful shape. Other people might just see it as a shape moving left, right, up, down. Both are correct. Now, if you were to apply this to humans, like maybe you see a group of people kind of having a chat, someone seemingly upset, someone with autism might not see the person upset. They might just see people standing around not doing much. So they might feel it completely appropriate to go up and make a joke. And you can see how this misunderstanding in terms of what one people think and another person thinks can lead to some social challenges. Oh, Colin says it's like the Pixar lamp. Absolutely. That is a really good way of thinking about it. When we see that little Pixar lamp going boop, 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 it looks like it's a personality. It's not. It's just a lamp bobbing about. Another good example is looking at this. Like you see here, this little boy or girl or whoever is seeing here, and they are seeing a 6. Now, if you were to ask the child who, let's say, have autism, what is the adult seeing? They may say, oh, they are also looking at a number 6, but they're not able to see, oh, actually, to the other person, it looks like a 9. So again, it's about putting yourself in someone else's shoes and being able to kind of mind read. So the theory of task teaches us a few things. It teaches us that these tasks promote mind reading in healthy volunteers. Now, obviously not real mind reading, but in a way it's taking a very educated guess about what might be happening, even if you do not have all the information. Having fMRI scans, they can show us that in the prefrontal cortex and other areas, there's a high level of activation. And we know that when people are learning a new task, a lot of activation, when they've learned it, less activation, but with those with autism, not always the case. People with autism see moving triangles without attributing thought to them. And brain activities of those with ASD differ during tests, even with correct answers. And this is the one I really like to focus on. Even though both answers are correct, they are still different from the answers that a neurotypical person would give. And this is how I support people in the workplace. We're not talking about hiring people who aren't able to do things. We're talking about hiring people who see the world in a different light, which can often help solve complex problems. So nice and interesting. Now, just to wrap up, what did we talk about today? Because some really interesting complex subjects. We talked about the associated cortex, the front part of the brain, and kind of what is it up to. We talked about the frontal lobe and its role in executive functions. So while we don't know exactly what is autism, we do know the key areas of the brain that are affected in a lot of the most predominant traits of autism. We learn at developmental abnormalities in these regions. So when things aren't going quite how we'd expect, what does that look like? And also frontal lobes in neurodevelopmental disorders. So we're getting somewhere. And whether or not you resonated with all these things, because I know some of you are autistic and found some of these tasks super easy, well, maybe you just have your all brains think differently. So it's not as simple as yes, no, but this is kind of a good base level. Now, in terms of some useful places to continue your reading, if you're interested, here are some lovely references. I have recorded this session, so you can always check it back at a later date. I don't expect any of you to remember, but everything has been nicely resourced and researched, thankfully. Now, to end up with any last questions before we finish up for the day, and now I can answer this question that was asked at the start. So we have learned that my spouse is autistic, my spouse is struggling and feels upset and wrong and keeps apologizing. So my best tip for this is helping the person to understand their own brain, to attend webinars like this. The more you understand about how your brain works, the more you realize that you're not broken, it's a healthy, natural part of being human. Hopefully this webinar has showed a lot of you that thinking differently is simply that, thinking differently, and it is a matter of interpretations about what you end up coming out with. Because society thinks quite consistently in a certain way, we then automatically say something's right or wrong by the majority of the people who think in a certain way. But from a scientific perspective, both are correct, in my views at least. Okay. Oh, thanks for all the lovely comments. Really appreciate it. And if any of you do have further questions down the line, you're always welcome to email me, drop me a message, and we'll go from there. And if any of you thought today was useful, go to our YouTube channel, like and subscribe, ring that little bell, and you can view lots of more informative sessions. We do ones on like the history of Asperger's, which is always interesting, the science of reading, lots of ones on neuroscience. We've got a whole autism series coming up in September and October, which I recommend checking out. So yeah, do get involved. Go to YouTube and search exceptional individuals. And our next webinar, again, we do these every single week. So don't just come for the autism. Come for all of them. Our next one, we're looking at Parkinson's disease in the brain. And you might think, how is this even remotely related? Well, actually, there's a lot of overlaps with Parkinson's in terms of how the brain functions, as well as autism. So though these conditions might seem quite different, there are overlap. So it's very interesting to understand the whole breadth of how the brain functions and works. And last of all, here's our contact details. If you found it useful, if you want to get in contact, my name's Nat, N-A-T. So just drop me an email at nat@exceptionalindividuals.com if you have any further questions. But other than that, we finished nicely on time. So I really hope you all enjoyed this and hopefully see you all next week. Oh, and then how the nominations go? Don't know yet. We're waiting. I guess they're busy deciding. So we'll see how it goes. But I don't have to like beg for votes anymore, so happy days. Oh, thanks everyone for the lovely comments and feedback. Really kind of you. All right, fantastic. Okay, everyone, I'm going to leave you now. Enjoy the rest of your Thursdays and hopefully see you soon.